On Monday, a bipartisan coalition comprised of 8 senators unveiled their proposal for comprehensive immigration reform. On Tuesday, President Barack Obama did the same. He outlined his proposal and said if Congress does not act, quote, in a timely fashion, I will send up a bill based on my proposal, end of quote. Our next guest is here to share his thoughts on immigration and the economy of the country. We welcome Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, a Republican representing District 25. Congressman, good to see you.
Good to see you, Helen.
You have also been reaffirmed as Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Financial Services. You are on the Committee of State of Foreign Assistance and Military Construction and Veterans Issues.
All of that all of that on the under the Appropriations Committee in the U.S. House.
So when we look at this, let's start with job numbers. Friday's job numbers. Your interpretation of the facts.
Dismal, but not a surprise, unfortunately. Look, we've been struggling with a bad economy for now, since the economic collapse. And I think, not only do we have bad numbers, we have Moody's saying that they're about to downgrade our debt. S&P already downgraded our debt. We unfortunately have had a number of tax increases kick in because of Obamacare, and there are more on their way.
But some would say that that's a good idea because that actually brings the tax increases brings more revenue to the federal government.
The problem is, look, see. You got to remember, President Obama in 2009 said that you do not raise taxes on anyone when the economy is struggling. Well, the economy's been struggling, and yet we have massive tax increases already that have been enacted, others on the way. I just got back from the World Economic Forum. I've been privileged for the last 3 years to represent the United States Congress in that very prestigious body.
In Davos.
In Davos, where there's 50 heads of state and 1,500 of the most important CEOs from around the globe. I was there with a delegation, a congressional delegation, and we met with maybe 20 or 30 CEOs, U.S. companies, and they all told us exactly the same thing. They want to invest in the United States, but they're not going to. They're not going to because in some cases, for example, those companies, multinational companies, U.S. companies, that are based here but they have operations elsewhere, which is what you want, obviously, to happen as much as possible. You want U.S. companies to grow and then obviously sell abroad. Well, one of them, I shouldn't probably mention their name, but said, we have hundreds of millions of dollars that we've made elsewhere. We would love to invest in the United States, but we get hit with a 20%, I believe he said, tax penalty if we bring that money into the United States. He says, so guess what our choice is? We're not going to invest that money in the United States. We want to. We're an American company, but we get hit so hard that we then invest it elsewhere. Another CEO said, look, we've been investing about $1 billion a year in the United States. Last year we cut it back in half. This year we're probably going to cut it back in half again. And we all asked them why. And they said, tax increases that are coming, Obamacare that has multiple tax increases, and increased regulations that are frankly driving business out of the United States. Now here's the sad part. The businesses are doing okay, the big ones. They're making money. But the problem is that they're not hiring. And they're not hiring because of the policies, frankly, that we've been on for the last 4 years.
But they're also not hiring because it's cheaper to outsource. It's cheaper to have a company do business another outside of the U.S.
Yes. Why is it cheaper? Because we have among the highest corporate tax rates in the industrialized world.
But there's so many. Excuse me for interrupting, but we're friends from a long time, so I love to arm wrestle with you.
And you'll interrupt me no matter what.
And I will interrupt you even if we weren't good friends.
Exactly.
There's so many loopholes in our tax code.
There are.
How many companies actually end up paying the high tax rate? Many. I would argue with you that few actually do. That we end up really having lower corporate tax rate because everybody's taking. Attorneys do really well, and so do really sophisticated accountants.
Exactly.
Because they're getting around through these loopholes.
Precisely because our tax code is nuts. It is absolutely crazy. It's not only an incentive to do business in the United States, it's actually an incentive to not do business in the United States, which is why in the House, look, we've done a lot of things right and we've done a lot of things wrong. But in the United States House of Representatives, we've passed budgets, which by the way, the Senate has yet to do for 4 years. We've passed budgets.
But they will now because there's a new
law. Now we force them to.
That's
right. The Republicans in the House basically said, you either do a budget, and we either do a budget, which is required by law, but the Senate has refused to do so for 4 years, even though it's illegal. I guess we can't arrest all the senators. So we said, all right, if you don't pass a budget, and if we don't pass a budget in the House, we, the members, shouldn't get paid. So now you watch. The Senate's probably going to pass a budget for the first time in 4 years. But we've passed budgets, and they're imperfect. They've got issues that are obviously it's fair to be critical about. But let me tell you what we did. We did tax reform in those budgets. We actually reformed the tax codes to grow the economy, Helen.
You were right. I was going to interrupt you a million times. Why extend the debt limit? The debt limit was extended to May. Why?
Well, because a couple things. Because we need to stop extending it unless we solve the problem. We can't continue to just spend, borrow money when we know that we're bankrupting the country. Unfortunately, remember, the president said he was not going to even negotiate on that, which is, frankly, not the way to do. In a democracy, you have to negotiate. So, frankly, I was
not the way
appalled.
to come to the table.
No, I was appalled that the president said that, and that was his attitude. And the Senate said, pretty much the same thing. So that's why we in the House said, okay, look, let's do this. We'll extend it for 3 months. But, Senate, you all have to do your job. You have to pass a budget. It's very difficult to negotiate when they don't even do a budget. How do you plan for the future if you don't budget yourself?
Then how does the budget get done? Because it's not a Republican budget that we've been seeing.
No, how it's supposed to work and what the law requires, by the way. But again, there's no enforcement. We're not going to arrest the senators. The law requires that the Senate does a budget. The House does a budget. The president recommends a budget. Then the House and the Senate negotiate. Once we both pass a budget, we go to conference and we pass a budget. And based on that budget, we do the appropriations bills. Well, what the Senate has done for the last 4 years is no budget, and we're just going to spend without even telling anybody how much we have. Well, let me tell you what we do know. What we do know is that we're spending money that we do not have. We know that this year, your federal government is spending in interest payments on the debt alone $220 billion. Helen, for the last couple of years, it's been very difficult to fund some of the essential services because we're bankrupt. And we're bankrupt because we're spending too much. But, for example, Pell Grants, which is key for students, right? Pell Grants are scholarships. They're for students in our university system. I fight awfully hard because it's very important for us here in South Florida. In what we are paying just in interest payments on our debt this year, we could fund 40 million Pell Grant scholarships for students in our universities. And within 7 years, it's going to go to almost $800 billion, just the interest payments on the debt. So what we're saying, and what some of us continue to say is, let's stop the madness. Let's prioritize spending. Let's create a budget, which now we force the Senate to do, because otherwise they don't get paid, the members of the Senate. And let's prioritize our spending. Let's stop spending money that we do not have. And let's reform the tax code to grow the economy. The Republicans control 1/3 of government. The other 2/3 have refused to go along with any of that.
I need to get into immigration reform, but just one little nugget that I'll throw out to you. An esteemed economist tells me that there's $21 trillion in islands that offer tax havens to those who, $21 trillion. That's money that's not being used, it's underutilized, it's not being properly invested. That if the U.S. actually reformed the tax code, that's $21 trillion that could possibly come to the U.S. to be more productive, which would make a huge difference, not only in the economy, but in the wealth of the nation and society as a whole.
Which is why we're going to continue to insist to the president that he sit down with us to reform the tax code. And reform it, by the way, does not mean raising taxes.
Well, some people say
done that, it doesn't work.
But some people say that's precisely not a good, when we look at the economy and we see that unemployment is going up, this isn't the time to be doing immigration reform. Immigration reform actually hurts the economy.
That was a very nice transition. That's an area where it actually can immediately help our economy. Here's the reality. Whether we like it or not, whether we care to admit it or not, we have an immigration system that's broken. It's broken for our national security interests. It's broken for our economic interests. And whether we like it or not, whether people care to recognize it or not, there are 10 or 11 million people here in the United States. They've been here for years, and they're basically in an underground society here. Bringing those people out and making sure that they pay their fair share of taxes, that they're part of the normal economy, that they follow the rules, follow the law, actually will help our economy, will help grow our economy. In other words, they're already here. So if anybody complains about, well, we shouldn't have more people here, we're not talking about more people. We're talking about those people that are already here. They're already here. Doesn't it make sense that if you have people that you know that they're here, we have two choices here, Helen. We can continue to ignore that reality. It doesn't go away if we ignore it.
Which
or
Marco
we can try to
Rubio
bring them
says-
forward.
Which Senator Marco Rubio has said that ignoring the problem is de facto amnesty.
Yes, that's what somebody
because they're staying here
is.
and they're nothing changes.
Correct. In other words, we're not talking about, hey, we're going to bring in 10 million people that are not here. No, they're already here.
How tough is it
how
going
do
to
we
get immigration reform passed?
It's tough. It is exceedingly tough. Look, I've been involved in this and other issues for many, many years. There's probably no heavier lift in Congress. There's probably no more difficult, more challenging, more complex, and more emotional issue than immigration reform.
If it makes sense economically and it's not being passed because of economic reasons, then it's because they're anti-Hispanic.
Look, it makes sense economically. It also makes sense because if we want to secure our borders, which right now, look.
The president says they're pretty secure.
Well, I know it's interesting, but there's 11 million people here who got here and not through legal means. Some overstay their visas because we don't know if they leave or not, by the way, which sounds crazy, but we don't. And others got in across the border. So you have to ask the question, how secure is it if we have 11 million people here? So if you want to secure the border, which I think the United States has the obligation to do, if you want to have a system that works, an immigration system that works, if you want to deal with the fact that we need agricultural workers, if you want to make sure that we don't educate the finest, the best in our best educational institutions, and then we send them abroad, we don't welcome them after we've educated them, we send them abroad to compete against us. And if you want to deal with the realities, I said before, whether you like it or not, those that don't like it or those that do like it.
But why is it
those
still...
people that are here, if you want to do that, we have to pass legislation.
But I have to think, and I think for the Republican Party this is critical, those who champion it from the Republican Party do it because they believe it's for the good of the country, but not because they're going to get any political benefit. To the contrary, I would argue with you that there are those who are going to be at risk or worried about primary challenges within gerrymandered districts, with all due respect, who are going to have a problem with those, let's say, Tea Party or whoever is going to say we're anti-immigration reform and we're going to give you a hard time if you want to run for re-election.
Remember, Tea Party is not their Tea Party folks. Their issue is fiscal sanity. It's not. They're not anti-immigration. They're not anti-immigrants. But however, it is an emotional issue, and it's an emotional issue that Democrats haven't wanted to solve, Republicans haven't wanted to solve, President Obama hasn't wanted to solve it. It's been used by all parties as a political issue. There have been Democrats and Republican members who have wanted to solve it. I think now, however, it is clear that the Republican leadership wants to solve it. It's clear that the Democratic leadership wants to solve it. I also think that President Obama wants to solve it. And there are a number of us who have been trying to solve it for many, many years, and we're still working. Now, here's the question.
Quick.
Will there be enough people who are willing to stand up, take the political heat to solve an issue that we know is broken? Or will most of us sit back and just, play lip service to it? I think there are enough of us who want to solve it. Look, I got sent to Washington, not to just be there, but to take on tough issues. This is a tough issue, but it's time that we solve it.
Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, thanks so much for joining me today on Issues.
Thank you, Helen.